Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggie, an amateur film reviewer, nerd, and pro-level Among Us player.
And I'm Nye, Shug's hired body double.
We look identical.
Okay, so yeah, Rushmore was the pick this week, right? It was your pick.
Yeah, I adore the films of Wes Anderson, and for those who don't know, I do a written film blog. It's not been hugely prolific during Corona, but I've been doing that since like 2012, 2013, and one of like the early films when I really turned it into a film blog was Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel.
Brilliant film.
Yeah, I adore it.
I think that's probably the only other Wes Anderson film I have seen that I know of. I'm not as into who makes what films in the same way that you are, but going into this film, obviously having seen Grand Budapest Hotel, I knew it was going to be weird.
Yeah.
And it's not kind of a Eraserhead surrealism. It's just it just doesn't sit particularly comfortably.
Okay.
I went into this not in a bad way, in any sort of way.
You
just kind of watch it, trying to figure out exactly the tone that he's going for.
It's quirky.
I went into this film not knowing much about it, and I'll be honest, I came out of this film not knowing much about it, because I spent the whole thing going, what is this kid trying to do? Trying to figure out the character? But I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time watching it, yeah.
Yeah, so as I say, Grand Budapest Hotel, first sort of Wes Anderson film I was introduced to. I think there's a review up on my blog. And I sort of went back, dived into all his films. As I think I mentioned at the end of last week, we have a really good friend who adores his films, definitely like nerded out about them with her. And this was the other one that I loved as much as Grand Budapest.
Yeah. It does, it has similar themes running through it, in the sense that you can tell very much that it's a Wes Anderson film.
Oh yeah, he's the kind of director who has tropes and recurring elements for sure.
There seems to be something about having very young actors or young characters portray kind of people that are a lot more mature than they should be.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah, because that is a sort of through line between the two that isn't necessarily in all his other films.
Yeah, okay, so maybe it's just because of my limited experience with Wes Anderson, but that was kind of what I got from this, comparing it to Grand Budapest Hotel. I thought that Max's character was just weird and hard to read, but it was really interesting to watch how he kind of communicated with adults as a 15-year-old. What I got from this was, I sat there the whole time thinking, if a kid or if a group of kids were to make a film out of that, their kind of like imaginary games that they were playing, this would be the film. The way that they've kind of, it's almost like they've adopted sort of very Hollywood-esque adult mannerisms, and the way they kind of talk and the way they hold themselves. It feels like kids trying to be adults, which is very... I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, okay, this is very interesting. So, I'm going to put some illumination on, you said a couple of times you're trying to figure out the character. I'll illuminate that a little bit with some pre-production.
Okay, go for it.
So, obviously, Wes Anderson, one of the two main people behind this. The other one is Owen Wilson. Yes, that's Owen Wilson.
Yeah.
Wow. We should have got our mate Kevin on to do his Owen Wilson impression. So, yeah, the pair of them met at the University of Texas in Austin. and they both went to sort of elite prep schools like that, and so they kind of wanted to write their own film set in one of those. But they wanted it to have like a slightly heightened reality, like a Roald Dahl book.
Yeah.
And they both kind of share similar aspects to this. So Owen Wilson was expelled from his prep school in 10th grade, sort of similar to Max in the film. And Wes Anderson, he basically is Max.
Right.
Like 100%. This is like a representation of him as a kid.
Okay, so it translates into his films directly then. Okay.
Yeah, like he had sort of Max's grand ambition, this kind of drive and creativity, but not for academic stuff. And he
Right,
also had a crush
okay.
on an older woman when he was at school.
Yeah, that relationship was odd.
It's really odd.
Because there was, I mean, she obviously overtly stated that he was 15 and nothing was ever going to happen, but
Yeah.
she was giving him looks. I was confused the whole way through. No wonder he didn't know what was going on.
Yeah. They actually began writing this before they made Wes Anderson's first ever film, Bottle Rocket, which is a little bit of an outlier in his sort of filmography. Like, it just feels a little different. It feels very cheap. It is very cheap. And that film was also Owen and Luke Wilson's first ever film.
Okay.
Both Anderson and Owen Wilson actually have small cameos in the film. Wes Anderson plays a student, apparently. And Owen Wilson is in a photograph as Edward Appleby,
Yeah.
the husband.
Yeah, uncredited for that one.
Yeah, both of them.
Yeah. And of course, Luke Wilson plays Peter.
Yeah, the Doctor. It's one of
Dr.
my
Peter
favourite
Flynn.
roles.
He turns up in his scrubs.
It's so
And
funny.
I've got to say, Max is absolutely savage.
Oh, right,
I mean,
absolutely.
you wouldn't want to cross him.
Oh, God, no. I think the other two things we have to talk about are the casting of Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman, like the two main figures.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that Bill Murray's just fantastic in this film. I
Incredible.
haven't seen him in much. I don't know why. It's just something that I've just not really seen many films with Bill Murray in. But his physical performance as well,
Yeah.
like when he just kind of, when he's coming to see Rosemary when she's
know
taking
exactly
the
where
outdoor
you're- yeah.
painting class,
Yeah,
and he's hiding behind the trees, and
I knew
then
that's what you were going to say.
and he runs off, and the way that he runs off is just like the least graceful thing I've ever seen.
It's so good.
But it's like watching a child. It's really interesting because there's kind of this juxtaposition between Herman and Max. So with Herman, you're kind of watching a child almost try to escape from a man's body.
Yeah,
And with Max, it's the complete opposite. It's a child trying to be a fully grown man.
100%. They are complete reverse of each other.
Yeah, and it's interesting because ordinarily you'd look at that relationship and you go, why did Herman at any point take any interest in Max? And he starts sort of temporarily hiring him, or he wants to, and
Yeah.
then he gives him handouts, and then they actually become friends. But then when you put it into that perspective of the fact that they think they could get from each other what they want, and they see their kind of own desires in each other, it actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's this crossover moment just before they do the kind of the digging, where they're trying to get fit and they're getting themselves prepared, and I feel like that's the moment where the two characters cross over, because that's when Herman's kind of going, right, I'm going to get fitter and younger for Rosemary, and I'm gonna act on this, and then Max is kind of going, right, I'm going to get myself mentally prepared for becoming this grand man that is going to get everything that he wanted in life, and so it feels like they're both obviously working towards different things, but that's kind of where they almost meet in the middle.
Yeah. And I think you've nailed exactly the character dynamic between the two, and I think we're going to get more and more into that, because I think that's what's at the heart of the film. But yeah, briefly talking about the casting of both, because these are kind of the two actors who have gone on to define Wes Anderson's career. Bill Murray has been in every single Wes Anderson film since this, and Jason Schwartzman, I think there might be some where he's either not appeared or appeared really, really minor roles.
Was Bill Murray in Grand Budapest Hotel?
Yeah, he plays one of the other concierges.
Right. Oh yes, I remember. Yeah. Proceed.
Yeah. So the role of Herman Bloom was actually written with Bill Murray in mind, but they didn't think they could get the script to him. But it just so turned out that Bill Murray's agent was a massive fan of Bottle Rocket and got him to read it.
Right.
He liked it so much, he said he'd work for scale, which I'm sure you know is like, it's just standard actors pay. Obviously, Bill Murray could command like a way higher fee.
Yeah.
He was obviously this massive kind of 80s comedic star, and this was almost like a rebirth for him into sort of smaller films.
Right.
And what he said kind of when he read the script was that he was drawn to Anderson Wilson's precise writing and felt that a lot of the film was about the struggle to retain a civility and kindness in the face of extraordinary pain, and I felt a lot of that in my life.
Yeah, I think he kind of nailed it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, every single character is going through or has been through some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the clashing of, I mean, you've got Max and Herman and Rosemary, and it's kind of like the clashing of all three trying to do good, but while they're still dealing with the stuff that they're going through.
Yeah.
And then obviously all three of them at certain points in the film want completely different things, so it feels like a real kind of three-way struggle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then from Bill Murray being like, with Herman being written with him in mind, they considered about 1,800 teenagers before they found Jason Schwartzman. Like, they went through so many people trying to find the right character. I believe Wes Anderson was saying he almost didn't make the film because they were struggling to find someone to play Max. But Schwartzman, when they did find him, managed to retain audience loyalty despite doing all these crummy things, is how he put it.
Right. How old was Jason Schwartzman at this point?
He'd have been a teenager, so I'm not exactly sure, probably around 18.
Okay, so he was still a young guy, really playing older than, above his age.
Yeah, and this was his first ever film.
Right. Oh, well, it was impressive then.
So,
I mean,
how they came to
he
find
was fantastic in it.
Yeah. How they came to find him was quite interesting. So, he is Talia Shire's son. If you know The Godfather or Rocky, she is one of the sort of major people in those.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that Francis Ford Coppola is his uncle and Sofia Coppola is his cousin, two of sort of legendary directors.
Yeah.
And it was Sofia Coppola who sort of introduced Jason to the casting director at a party.
Okay. So it was all a bit of who you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so nepotism alive and well, but you know what?
Nepotism at its finest.
In this case, it worked out well because Jason Schwartzman is brilliant, and he always is.
Yeah, I mean, he was incredible in this. I think that's part of the reason why it was such a struggle to kind of figure out exactly who the character was, because it was because he played it so convincingly. You were trying to work out whether it was just a facade or whether this was genuinely who the kid was. And you were kind of waiting, especially towards the end, when he kind of had sort of accepted that he and Rosemary weren't going to be a thing. He met Margaret Yang, and you were kind of waiting for almost like the scales to fall from his eyes and for him to go, right, actually I am a 15-year-old. But he never let up.
I love the fact that at the end, like, his whole journey is getting back to that person who is driven about all these extra stuff. who has this passion for making plays and doing random things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know where this funding from the plays comes from.
Oh, we're gonna get
Because
into the plays.
yeah, we'll get into them.
The last thing I want to say, so Jason Schwartzman, after being introduced to the casting director, showed up to his audition wearing a prep school blazer and a Rushmore patch that he made himself. And so obviously Wes Anderson just was like, this is my guy.
Yeah, I mean, this is who the character is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, they obviously work perfectly together. They've been working together for, 22 years now, and
Yeah.
always delightful. So let's get into the film. And the film opens up with this Goodwill Hunting joke in Max's dream, where he solves this maths equation on the board. And obviously this film came out in 1998, so 1 year after Will Hunting. So that would have been like really fresh in people's mind. I think it just immediately sets up what kind of film this is. It's very jokey. And clearly someone who knows about film and respects film and is willing to take like fun shots at other films. It also kind of sets up who Max is, which is he's actually pretty terrible at maths and school subjects. But he's this really creative person who puts together these elaborate ideas.
Yeah, I think going into the film, obviously knowing a bit more about Wes Anderson than I would have done, or that some other people would have done by the time this film came out.
Yeah.
You kind of, having seen Grand Budapest Hotel, you kind of immediately know that it's that opening scene is strange because it feels very much like a Wes Anderson sort of joke.
Yeah.
But it also fits perfectly into the film. It could have been a scene in the film without it being a dream sequence. And I think he found that kind of balance of obviously maintaining the absurdity to clearly make it a dream sequence, but then also have it in keeping with the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And I just really like the fact that as well that I think everybody at some point in their lives has had not necessarily a dream, but has had a thought of something like that happening, where they're kind of called upon to be sort of the hero in a way.
For you, was it
and
football?
Then for me, it was like going to a football game and they needed a player and they just called you out from the stands, that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100% the same for me.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of something that everybody has had one of those moments or more, but it's not really said. We've never had the conversation about us going to a football game and just imagining that we got asked to get on the pitch and play, which is of course the most ridiculous thing in the world. But I think everybody has those moments, and even though they're not spoken about, to put that into a film, you can immediately identify with it.
Yeah.
And it's odd because you're watching this film going, this is completely absurd and this is completely mad, but actually in reality it's kind of not, because all it's doing is articulating moments that you've experienced yourself.
100%. And I think that's what works so well about Max's character, is he is so odd and eccentric, and you'd think hard to relate to, but actually in so many ways you can relate to him.
Yeah. And I think, that's credit to brilliant writing as well as brilliant acting, I think.
Yeah.
I think just constructing a character that in many ways is kind of very honest, I think, and in the same way that opening scene is, to kind of be able to acknowledge that there are elements of yourself that are represented however kind of unrealistic or over the top they may seem on screen, to kind of be able to see that they are represented on screen and you kind of recognise them in yourself is quite an honest thing to be able to put together as a director as well, 100%. And a writer.
Yeah, completely agree. And then we go to morning chapel, and we have a speech by Herman Bloom, a former Rushmore student, and this is hysterical. He's
Yeah,
basically
I concur.
yeah, he just goes into this rant
I'm
about like just speaking to basically Max and maybe like one or two others about sticking it to the rich students, and
yeah,
Max is loving it. Like everyone else is
yeah,
like, "What the hell is going on?" And he's up there like giving like standing ovation.
yeah. So there's a couple of interesting things with this. So obviously, I think the kind of message behind it is obviously quite liberal,
Yeah,
and I think there are always elements of that sort of liberal satire in Wes Anderson's film. Start that word again. Wes Anderson's films, um, and so kind of seeing that in a film earlier than the one I'd already seen was was kind of it was consistent, I guess, with his other films that I'd seen. But also, this for me set up Bill Murray's character perfectly,
yeah,
because you've got to remember. Well, you very quickly learn that his sons are those rich kids.
yeah. He
And
can't
so
stand them.
this is kind of, yeah, and this is for me, I think this is kind of like a sort of immediate representation of his own self-hatred,
Hmm.
which is something that is very much like, I know that Rosemary brings it up later on in the film that he hates himself, and obviously at the time you don't necessarily understand that, but as the film goes on, you kind of look back on that first speech and you realise that actually this isn't just a political thing. This is about Herman
Yeah,
kind of hating what he is and where he is, and so it does also play very much into the character's hands.
yeah. I think the best scene of kind of showing that is the birthday where he's just sitting by the side of the pool as all the kind of kids are doing stuff. He's just there chain smoking and drinking, and
Yeah,
then off the diving board.
yeah. It was, that scene was quite uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it felt real.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know, like it's not. That was actually one of the less overdone scenes. It felt kind of more very simple.
I think that's the kind of genius
Um,
of Wes Anderson, is his ability to put in this really kind of powerful raw scene in this just quirky, let's call it Wes
yeah,
Anderson-y film.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he's definitely, from what I can tell, he's definitely built his own genre.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
there's an honest trailer which is all of his films together,
yeah,
and there's a scene in one of his films called Moonrise Kingdom, where it's like two kids dancing on a beach to like some '60s song played on like an old gramophone player, and it's like, is this the most Wes Anderson-y thing to ever Wes Anderson? It's like, yes, yes, it is.
yeah. He's very much got his own sort of genre going.
Yeah,
But what I liked about that scene in particular as well was that not only gonna cite our first ever episode, there are layers to it. Not only is it that this scene in particular feels, like you said, very raw in the middle of this kind of absurdity. I'm gonna keep using that word today, I guess. But even within that scene, there's this kind of serene moment where he's underwater,
yeah,
and it almost kind of mutes, and I think that's what Herman's character wants to do, but it almost mutes everything else. It's like a completely different film. For a moment, it's like Herman steps out of that world and that film entirely, and he's in something completely different. It's like a different part of Hollywood.
yeah,
And I think to be able to kind of recognize that as a director and just kind of go, right, now we're gonna break the skin and we're gonna go step out of and just have a moment where it's not one of my films, I think actually kind of shows real like humility as well,
it's a good.
as a director.
I do like that, but I also obviously he finds kind of that escape he's looking for in Max, who is this complete embodiment of Wes Anderson and Wes Anderson films as well.
Yeah.
So the humility's
Yeah.
out of the window there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's there's always gonna be a little bit of arrogance in filmmaking, especially when it's so representative of like you as a director.
Yeah.
Um, you find the same with, I mean, you find the same with Tarantino as well.
Yeah,
And
like going back
those
to people
those
like
directors,
Hitchcock and Kubrick.
yeah, those directors have really kind of established their own style. Um, you'll always find their own sort of ode to themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that scene it was just a very kind of, it was just an interesting moment in comparison to the rest of the film. I mean, obviously the whole film is interesting in its own way, but it felt like a very like an outlier, but intentionally.
Yeah, and the last thing I kind of want to point out about kind of the meeting of Max and Herman is obviously, they both immediately really like each other because they, as you said sort of in the introduction, they are immediately drawn to this person who is almost who they want to be. Max wants to be this kind of grown up and Herman wants to be this kid again.
Yeah.
But I just love, as Max leaves, Brian Cox, he's not in a huge amount, but he's so good. And he just, as he leaves, and Herman says he's a sharp kid, just the line of, he's the worst student we've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Brian Cox as Guggenheim he almost adds that kind of grounding to the film.
Yeah.
Because he's a character that you check in with throughout the film. And he almost breaks Max, like the character, like when he gets one of two, maybe two or three moments that you see Max kind of break his sort of, not facade, but that character of being an adult. It's when Guggenheim expels him.
Yeah, and he's sobbing in the chair.
Yeah, and that's when you see like an utterly distraught child.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he brings us back down to earth, and even in the scenes with him, like he's a lot less kind of caricature. He doesn't have these delusions, and I think also, like obviously we spoke about everybody kind of dealing with their struggles, but he also adds that kind of humanity into it when you see him after a stroke, and you kind of, all of these there are elements of these other characters that are very kind of odd. They're not quite what you would expect to see in a person.
Yeah.
I don't really know how else to describe it. I can't find the words for it today. But with Nelson Guggenheim, I think he grounds you through the film, and when you see him have this stroke, it's kind of like him sort of reiterating his humanity, and you don't necessarily get that with the other characters. I think you see it more so with Herman, but yeah, I found him kind of a lot more almost like a paperweight, just keeping everything pinned down.
Yeah, he almost feels like this kind of drop of normality with all this weird, wacky nonsense happening around him. And no wonder he has a heart attack as just as a normal person having to deal with Max Fisher.
Yeah. And then the only thing that brings him out of his kind of sedated state is Max.
Yeah, it's great. And we go into sort of this montage of Max just setting up or being heavily involved with like so many extracurricular clubs.
It's brilliant.
It's great, and I think it's a perfect setup of his character. Like, he just throws himself into so many different things. He's always driven to do something, and it's never school, because we're also told he's on academic probation because he's doing terrible at studying.
Yeah, one thing I like about this is that you find that out afterwards because you're set up to believe that he is a really kind of high achieving student.
Yeah,
He's busy. You think, wow, how's he involved in so many things? He must be kind of really highly regarded in school, and then he gets slapped with this probationary period and or this kind of probationary sort of condition, and you're and suddenly it's like the illusion is gone and you're like, okay, so this is somebody who is way too big for his boots.
I mean, I very much I got the sense of him being someone who is incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart, incredibly talented, and driven when he is passionate about something. But when he doesn't have that passion, he just doesn't apply himself. And honestly, it's something I can kind of relate to.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this as well is that I can completely relate as well.
Yeah.
Especially as somebody who has always kind of excelled more so in the kind of in the arts and in sport. Although I've always been kind of academically okay
Yeah.
and quite like sound, it's never been something that I've really had a passion for, and so I can utterly relate to that. I think it's just bringing that forward to sort of the world we live in. I think it's a real comment on what is considered. I mean, even now we see arts being defunded, and you see sports being taken off the curriculum or not being accessible in certain universities, and I think the kind of value of those more sort of hands-on vocational skills
Yeah.
is completely undermined in day-to-day life. And I think that this is, again, it's a way that Wes Anderson can sort of bring all this abnormal, wacky content and relate it to the world that we're living in. And I think that aligns with how you can see parts of yourself in all of these completely weird characters.
Yeah. What's the quote that goes around on the internet a lot, and I don't know if it is attributed to Einstein. I feel like it might get misattributed to Einstein. The one about if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you'll spend its whole life thinking it's useless or something.
Yes, yeah.
And it's kind of that.
I've heard this, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
I
feel
think towards the end of the film, or at the end of the film, especially when you see the play, you see the kind of, obviously he gets the appreciation for what he's good at, but you see how it affects. I mean, you've got Herman sitting there in tears. You've got and before the show, it kind of pans along the row, and it's got all these. It's got police officers there. It's got
like
people
everyone
from,
who's appeared in the film, pretty much.
yeah, is there for I don't know what reason. I don't know why they're there. I mean, I can understand why the police are there, and like maybe some safety regulators from the council or something, but I don't know why everyone else is there. I think just because it's Wes Anderson, but you see how it affects all of them,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, if we without trying to get too political about it, because I think this film it speaks for itself, but it's fun, and it needs to be kind of seen as just sort of a feel good film. It does make that comment that those kind of more vocational, less traditional subjects or topics or skills can be really celebrated and really effective.
Yeah, that's why I love that Max's journey in this isn't to kind of grow up and realise he needs to knuckle down and study. It's his journey is he loses his drive, he stops kind of caring, resigns himself to working at his dad's barber shop, and then he finds that kind of passion again. And the moment where he finds himself and asks his friend to start taking notes again.
Yeah, where he's looking at the kite.
Yeah, the Kite Flying
Yeah.
Society ideas, list of possible members. Like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that kite flying scene is kind of very obvious. Very kind of it's simple in terms of the way that you can interpret it.
Yeah.
But simple yet effective. Yeah, I think it's great that this film kind of just, it makes its statement and then almost goes in the opposite direction, and ultimately ends on a very high note with some crazy plays in between.
Yeah. And I think the last thing to sort of mention before we move on to Rosemary is there's the very small reference to the fact they're cancelling Latin.
They're cancelling what?
Latin.
Latin, yeah,
which
yeah.
kind of sets up this whole thing, but it also completely sets up Max's, which demonstrates Max's kind of lack of understanding of other people, and particularly of Rosemary.
Yeah.
Because obviously, when he first kind of talks to her, and she says her thesis was on Latin American economic policy.
Yeah.
So he starts going off about how they're cancelling Latin. And,
yeah. And then she finishes off what she's saying, and he goes, okay, so moving on.
Yeah.
They're cancelling Latin. He goes back.
Yeah. And so he thinks that, saving Latin is what kind of will get her, but that's not ever kind of what, she didn't care. And it leads up to that moment where he's, arguing with Herman, and he's saying, I saved Latin, what did you ever do for her? And it's just this, he doesn't get her at all.
This, for me, these are the moments where I felt really kind of confused about the character, and about, whether this kind of, him being an adult was real or not, because it was almost like a kid sort of singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as an opera singer. It was
I love that comparison. That's amazing.
That's what it felt like, because it was like these are two opposite ends of the spectrum trying to work together, and it's almost like they physically can't. Like, you're watching it. Yeah, and this is what I mean when I say it felt like a kid's kind of, when you play an imaginary game with your friends, and you kind of be like, right, okay, I'm going to go and do this now, and then we're going to do this, and it felt like if a kid made a film and acted in it, it would, of those games, it would be this.
Yeah.
And it shows, it does, and it shows his kind of lack of understanding of people, which I think you kind of see all the way through until the end. I thought was a really kind of poignant moment was, for me, after he'd sort of had that realization, it was the moment where he goes back to, is it Magnus?
Yeah.
And he shoots Magnus with the air rifle and gets him to be part of the play. I thought, for me, that was one of the moments where, the first moment where you kind of see him start to actually understand the people around him.
Yeah, and there's the whole line of, I always wanted to be in one of your plays, and he's like, I know you did, mate. And it's not even necessarily that he always knew, he just, I think he always knew, actually, in terms of the Magnus one. He just never kind of wanted to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably also an element of him just expecting that everybody wants to be in his plays as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but there was just the way that, he shot Magnus in the ear, and obviously made the joke about his other ear, but knew that was the way to get through to him.
Yeah.
And I think, that was when he first sort of really showed that he understood the people around him, and he understood how to kind of approach them and what would engage them. And so that was a moment where it wasn't when he dropped out of school, it wasn't when he kind of started getting fitter with Herman or whatever. It was moments and points in the film like that which for me were like, okay, this character is growing, and he's still this kid that is acting like an adult, but this is where he's kind of, you can sit down and cross your legs and have all these mannerisms, but that's not what makes him an adult. It's the stuff like how he speaks to Herman and how he kind of builds on the relationship in that way.
The one that I really love is he spent the whole film kind of lying to Herman and everyone else about his dad being a neurosurgeon.
Yes.
And he introduces his dad at the barbershop to Herman. And, you know, that's like this huge amount of growth. It shows you he stopped being ashamed. Like, even, you know, at the start, you know, the speech. The whole speech is, you know, some of you aren't coming from money. Yeah. And he's still, you know, lying about, you know, coming from a richer profession than, you know, a richer family than he is.
Yeah.
And his dad's, you know, never upset about running a barbershop. His dad just seems wonderful. I love his dad. He's so supportive.
Yeah. Oh my God, such a cutie.
I
also love the parallel between being a barber and a neurosurgeon. Like, it's still operating on people's heads in a sense.
Yeah.
And I love that and I think that is kind of just illustrates how Max kind of, like,
what's the upgrade from being a barber?
Yeah, he just spends his whole life basically trying to kind of fantasize everything and make it seem a whole load more kind of extravagant than it is. And I loved it, that parallel, and it only clicked when he brought Herman in for me. I only kind of recognized that. I was like, oh, okay, it's been like a running joke the whole time.
Yeah. You know what? I completely missed that. Like 3 times I've seen this film for maybe. Yeah. Now you've said it. It's like, yeah, of course, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, which I just thought was like another. Yeah, I thought it was really funny.
I love how, again, talking about how supportive his dad is. I just love the moment where Max, you know, starts talking to him about how he's wondering if he's spending too much time starting clubs and putting on plays, and his dad just like, you do what you want, and he's like, yeah, you're right, I should be picking up chicks.
I think he said, oh, maybe I'm spending too much time, and his dad just goes, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, my parents would not. But yeah, I think it's this whole film. It's really Max's character. It's odd because moments like that kind of show that, like, Max spends his whole time kind of trying to come across as very self-aware. He knows what he wants. He knows what he's doing, but he's really clutching at straws, I think. And I think he's trying to learn from everyone around him. That's why he's immediately interested in Herman. That's why, I think to an extent, that's why he's in love with Rosemary. She has this kind of, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into her a bit more, but that's why, like, she has this sort of real emotional vulnerability to her, which from the get-go, which he doesn't possess until he meets her. And like it, and even those kind of very brief conversations with, like, his dad, where you say he goes, yeah, I should be, like, trying to pick up chicks, and he's looking for answers from everybody that he's talking to, because he really doesn't know what he's doing, and he really doesn't know what he wants.
Yeah.
Or maybe he knows what he wants, but he doesn't know how to get there. He doesn't know how to communicate with the people around him, how to kind of appeal to those people in order to do what he wants to do. And it's that kind of, that difference from those conversations that he's having with his dad at the beginning, him being kind of immediately drawn to Herman and Rosemary because of what they can offer him and what he's looking for, and that conversation with Magnus, where it's not about him trying to get something out of them for himself. It's not about him trying to grow as a person. That it's the process. He's already doing that now.
Yeah, I think for sure. Like, his whole journey is essentially just acknowledging other people almost.
Yeah, and I just think it's really strange how like the way that he presents himself as a complete mature adult, all of that is really, ultimately, like, even though it's very much him, it ends up being quite superficial in the sense that that's not the stuff that makes him the adult in the end.
Yeah, incredibly. I completely agree. And obviously, you know, his relationship with Margaret, in that kite flying scene where he goes and apologises because he's just treated her terribly by essentially only viewing her as a potential performer in his plays, not as a person and a friend
Yeah.
and potential
Yeah.
love interest. He just, every scene before that, he just kind of blows her off, except when he's like, "Oh, you should come audition for my play."
Yeah. Yeah. It's and then obviously at the end, he's got kind of that relationship has grown. You don't really see much of that relationship, but I think that sort of like that relationship ends up being like the marker for his growth.
Yeah. You mentioned, let's talk about Rosemary. What kind of did you think about Rosemary in this film?
I was a bit torn. Maybe it's because obviously we've just seen The Sixth Sense and we've had our conversations about her, about Olivia Williams' performance in that,
Yeah.
and but and maybe the reason I was torn was because I always thought that there was like she had this little thing for Max, whatever, however kind of small it was. Like she says at the beginning that he reminds her of her husband,
Which we then later
Um,
learn her husband set up, I think, the beekeeping society.
yes, yeah.
So you can
So
definitely, there is some kind of parallel there.
yeah, and I think whether it's romantic or not, I think she has this sort of admiration for him, or some sort of she's fond of him.
Yeah.
I think she reminds him. Obviously, she says he reminds her of her husband. I think he gives her something that she can't find just anywhere, which makes me question, not necessarily Olivia Williams, but makes me question the character slightly. I'm a bit like, know your boundaries, because you're saying that you know them, but then it's a bit weird. But I think she adds something really valuable to the story.
I think there's an interesting thing with her where obviously she is, someone going through grief, lost her husband, still obviously very traumatized by that. But I also feel like she's almost a bit of a, not necessarily a blank slate of a character, but she is a character that both Herman and Max can project what they want onto her. She's not given as strong a character as either of them, and maybe that's because she's grieving and doesn't really know where she's going in life. But there's just somewhere where they're able to project their kind of fantasies of her onto her.
Yeah, I think that this is. I mean, this film is very much from the perspective of men.
Oh yeah, I mean, most Wes Anderson films basically star white men.
Yeah, so it's, and like the other female characters, the few other female characters in this film, are very much used as a tool for men to discover themselves with, and I feel like there's not much kind of resolve with, or resolution with, Rosemary and her relationships, because like obviously she kind of settles things with Max, but then there's still that thing as they're walking onto the dance floor at the end. It's still weird.
Yeah.
She and Herman
They kind of make up at the end.
kind of don't. You
Yeah.
don't really know where it's going. Like she doesn't seem to have this sort of this character arc whereby she's settled at the end in the same way the others are.
Well, I feel her character arc is about sort of coming to terms with the loss of her husband, and she only really confronts that in the scene where Max kind of sneaks into, guns in through the window, and
but you just
actively
never
confronts
really.
her about it.
Yeah, but you never really see her actually deal with it.
Yeah, it's very fair. I think it's a very
And whereas you see Max and you see Herman go, right, okay, we're gonna do something about the position we're in, and we're gonna move our story on a bit.
yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah. And you see that with other male characters as well. I mean, you see it with Herman, you see it with Max, you see it with Magnus, you see it with Dirk.
Yeah.
Like, you see these male, however, like, even to an extent, Guggenheim. Like, they all have their kind of quite definite endings, their end points, and they've all kind of had this definite journey by the end of the film. And then you look at someone like Rosemary, and she doesn't really have a beginning or an end. And it's sort of the same with Margaret. Like, she doesn't really have a beginning or an end. I'm not sure you can use Margaret comparatively because I think she's meant to be a smaller character.
Yeah.
But
Rosemary's one of the three main characters. I think,
yeah,
I love this
she
film.
kind of floats through the story.
Yeah, I love this film to pieces, and I think you still have to look at it and criticize it for this. It's
Yeah, but as far as her portrayal of the character goes, I think it was fine.
I think
I
completely agree with you about the story arc. I think that's the weakest element of the film is her story arc. I think there is one there. I think it's subtler. I'd love to talk to Wes Anderson about kind of what he envisaged. That's a bad word. Envisioned. That to be kind of where he thinks she is at the end, because I assume he has an idea of where she is in that kind of final sequence. At Max's play, and I'm not 100% sure. It's the one that's more open to interpretation from the audience.
Yeah.
So I'd love to.
Yeah. Well, I think there's just kind of, to be honest, I think there's less to it. Like, you see, the thing is like Max is struggling with the way he communicates with people and his ambitions, and the way that his ambitions don't fit in. He's struggling with the fact that he's not come from the same background as the people that he's surrounded by. He's struggling with how he feels about, that's how he relates to other people. You've got Bill, Bill Murray's character Herman, who's struggling with his own sort of how he relates to himself and how he sees himself, his marriage, his kids, his how, to be honest, how his work is. He's making money that he kind of squanders his money. He doesn't really use it very kind of efficiently. I mean, he buys into the aquarium.
Yeah, the aquarium.
Without a second thought.
He doesn't give him the 35 grand he wants. He only gives him 2.5, but he still just throws 2.5 grand away to build an aquarium that they don't have permission for.
So he's got a lot going on, but then you kind of see Rosemary, and it's just the whole thing is about the fact that she's dealing with her husband's death.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's almost like everything that she does is in relation to that.
I do think she also has this moment where she kind of calls them out at the end, where they're both silly children who deserve each other.
Yeah, but she does that with no force or power or anything. I feel like she doesn't have the sort of strength.
I might disagree with you on that
when
one.
She
I
says
think that is the point where she does have a bit of force and power, where she kicks Max out of the house, and I think that's the moment where she calls him out, and almost that's the moment where Max realizes he needs to change more.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess if you're going back to the point about it being sort of people trying to be kind in the face of all of their struggles, then I suppose that sums it up. That she does it with kindness rather than force.
I think she's.
So I accept
she's
that.
been trying to do it with kindness throughout the film, and that's the moment where she doesn't, and she actually calls Max on his BS, and I think that's the moment.
Yeah,
where...
but the tone she uses is very kind of gentle, and it's not forceful in the same way that, say, someone like Guggenheim or somebody like Max when he's directing, she doesn't do it with that sort of aggression.
I think
maybe it's because she's a woman, and because that's how Anderson wanted the character to be as a woman.
I still think there was a power there that just cuts to Max's core when she says it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not powerful. I'm just saying it's not aggressive.
That's fair. Fair enough. I want to talk about Max's
Yeah.
first play now. He's putting on a production of
With
Serpico.
the train. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's definitely the most, kind of the highest tech
And
school production I've
until
ever seen.
Max's second play.
Until Max's second play.
Yeah.
And then it's all sorts of crazy. It's interesting because it feels very much like a Wes Anderson play in a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah, 100%.
Like this idea that the grandeur of the production is bigger than the space that it's meant to fill.
And it is very much about, like, this is kind of where you go. If you hadn't before realised he's meant to represent Wes Anderson, this is a big indication that this is just Wes Anderson.
Yeah. It's just Wes Anderson being Wes Anderson in his own film.
Yeah.
Or someone else being him in his own film. Yeah.
I also think kind of the slow-mo walk onto stage is just an iconic shot now. Like, that's such a classic. Wes Anderson loves a slow-mo walk sequence like that.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the best he uses.
Yeah, when he's receiving the applause at the end with the flowers. Yeah.
And is he got the bloody nose at that point, or is that the later?
He's got the bloody nose. Well, it's like the whole sort of, it's being a martyr and like that kind of, that thing that we experience in our heads where we're like, well, maybe we'll get kind of called up and asked to play, sort of being the hero again. It's like, it's fantasizing about how the very best experience that you could possibly have, where you end up being the hero. It's kind of like he gets punched in the face and he gets a bloody nose, and he was the good guy all along. It was just him trying to be good, and he goes through some hardship for it, and then hardship. I'm gonna clarify that for the listeners. And then he goes on stage and he gets praised for it.
And I love that we go from that high to kind of the low of the dinner.
Yes.
Like, just immediately he's flying, almost Icarus-esque. He's flying so high, and then he just plummets as he's just the rudest, most inconsiderate person to Peter.
Yeah. Which I think, I mean, is true of quite a lot of show business, I think.
Yeah, and he keeps going on about how he wrote a hit play.
Yeah, he wrote a hit play for a school.
You know what? If I'm ever in an argument again, I'm just going to start shouting about how I wrote a hit play, even though I've never written a play.
Yeah, well, it's like this idea is beyond his kind of capacity, really, isn't it? And it goes back to like him looking to be something that he isn't, and it's him trying to like clutch at straws.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the perfect moment of this high into this low, and he kind of confesses his love for her at that point, and it really kind of but I also think this is the moment where Herman kind of starts to feel attracted to her.
Yeah. That for me, one thing that I found really good was, in terms of Bill Murray's performance, was that you kind of don't know, and then it kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, even when he's sort of saying, I don't think she's right for you, and all of that stuff, you still don't quite get it.
Yeah.
And then it clicks when you see him show up at her door. And yeah, I just thought that worked really well. It's kind of him, I think it's him struggling to sort of get out of this sort of adult's body and try and feel younger again. I think that's his kind of part of his struggle. I
almost wonder if he's attracted to Rosemary because Max is, and he's like, Max has it all figured out.
Yeah. Do you know what? I wouldn't be surprised. I remember being in like year 7, first day of secondary school, and people would go, oh, I fancy so and so, and you'd hear other people go, yeah, me too. like getting on the bandwagon, kind of there being like this one girl that everybody obsesses about, and it lasts for like 3 days, and then there's another girl that everyone obsesses about, and I mean I can only speak from a heterosexual male's perspective at the age of 12,
Yeah.
but
I'm still mentally
but like
there.
so, but that's like that was my experience of school, and I can kind of see that in this film. Like when you say that he's only kind of doing it because Max is, and it's not even just in terms of romantic relationships. It's also that, like, as a kid you see somebody with a sweet and you want that sweet, or some kid with a toy and you want that toy.
And I mean,
And
you
it's
kind of get in that dinner, you get the sense they're both pretty infantile, because Max makes this quite infantile joke, and Herman's the only one who laughs.
and oh my god, when he laughs, I cracked up at that. That was hilarious. When he's stifling his laugh and like doing a snort, and yeah, for me that was where I was like, right, Bill Murray's brilliant.
Oh yeah, he's phenomenal.
That for me was just like, that was the first time that you saw the child in Bill Murray's character in Herman. Like, I think that was when I realized, okay, this is what. That's when I was like, okay, so he's the child, and he's trying to be the child, and Max is trying to be the adult.
Yeah.
That's when I first saw that dynamic.
And of course, Herman kind of falling in love with Rosemary. I don't even know if he's in love with her. It's just he starts kind of seeing her, and that ends up leading to him and Max falling out.
Yeah, I think I think he's just struggling.
Yeah.
It's
an escape from
is really
his terrible
unhappy.
marriage.
He's in a terrible marriage. He's depressed. He doesn't like his kids. Like, he's just not happy. And I think maybe it's that he sees that Rosemary is making Max happy, and he goes, I want some of that.
Yeah.
And again, it's I want your toy kind of thing. And yeah, and I think that's more of what it is, because there's no huge pushback when they break up.
Yeah.
It's not, the story doesn't go on and he tries to like win her back or anything.
That's why I feel like
it's him.
Even at the end where Max is trying to push them back together, it's kind of like he still doesn't get her. Or
Well, I think it's more that they get to that point and they no longer like they're not trying to go for each other. They're like, I think by that point they've settled. Like, Herman, by the time Herman gets to the play, he's discovered himself a bit more. He's gone and had his hair cut. He's got a bit fitter, and I think he's realised that Rosemary is not what's going to make him happy.
Yeah.
You even see him become very emotional when he's watching the play, and you don't really see, like, the rest of the time he's trying to suppress it. Like, even when Rosemary breaks up with him, he's not trying to show any kind of emotional vulnerability.
Yeah.
He's trying to bat it away, and then you see him cry at the end of the film, and you kind of go, okay, he's starting to open up a bit, and he's starting to sort of learn a bit about himself.
That's a phenomenal point. I love that.
So that's why I don't think they get back together.
I
because
agree.
they realise by the end of the film they don't need that.
Yeah, it's not what's going to make either of them happy in the long run.
Yeah.
And then we kind of get into my favourite sequence of the film, which is the kind of the Max v Herman prank war. Are they pranks? Are they trying to murder each other? Who knows?
I think this is... So there's that moment of almost like synergy where they're getting fitter together. Like I said, that kind of crossover point. And I think this is the opposite end of that spectrum. This is where they're clashing, and they're doing it the only way they know how. And what I find really interesting here is this just sums up the characters. Like, Max breaks up his marriage.
Yeah.
and Max like goes for the jugular, but he goes to like his wife, and he gets involved in things that are beyond his years. And then Herman just goes and drives over his bike,
Yeah.
like as if that's a proportionate response
Hey,
to him ending his marriage. Like it's too. And although like yes, Herman wasn't happy, like we know that, but so maybe it's the fact that his marriage was worth Max's bike or something. But like it just for me, it sums up like Herman went. This guy is ruining my life. He's getting involved in my relationships. I'm gonna break his bike.
before he breaks
Like,
the bike, Max also fills his hotel room with bees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's that seemed a lot more childish.
Yeah.
I've got to say.
And then,
But I
Max
think
just tries to kill him and cuts the brakes on his car.
yeah, like this is like Max is doing things that you see in a mafia film,
Yeah.
and Herman and Herman is just like, I'm gonna bend your wheel on your bike, as it like for me that sums up where the two characters are, and I think that what's really interesting is that like that's where they're trying to kind of break out of the kind of skin that they're already in.
Hmm.
So like that's when that's like the real sum up of who they are as people and what they're trying to look for. And
it kind of
yeah,
ends,
I just love the disproportionate response of breaking his bike.
I love
And he's
how
trying to kill him and run
understated it
over.
is. Like normally you get like this escalation, but Max just goes to 100, and Herman
Yeah.
just stays at like a 10.
But it doesn't feel out of place either.
Yeah.
You don't go, why are they doing that? You go, okay, yeah, this makes sense that this character would do this.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, it's so good. It kind of ends with Herman having Max arrested.
Yeah, I was surprised actually that he got the police involved.
Yeah.
But then again, you see Max like just walk out. You don't see anything about like the trouble that he gets in ever. Actually, the only time you see that is when he gets expelled.
Yeah.
You never really see him get in trouble for any of the stuff that he does.
You do feel like he could talk his way out of anything.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I just don't understand how the adults are like, how they deal with him. Like, how did they just accept him for what he is?
Yeah.
Like, there are so many times where he gets in positions where like, you'd only expect a business person to be able to do. As like in a professional capacity, somehow he manages to wriggle his way into these situations. Maybe that's kind of like a direct representation of Anderson himself. I don't know, but I spent the whole film going, how are these people letting him just kind of walk in and like talk to the board of the school about setting up an aquarium? Like, how has he got that sort of power?
He doesn't talk to them. He just starts trying to set up the aquarium, and that's where he gets expelled.
Oh no, sorry, I'm thinking of the Latin club. That's what I'm thinking of.
He does. Yeah, he does
Like,
talk them into research.
this is a student. This is a student that has a direct impact on the curriculum. Like, just because he wants to. Like, how does any student ever have that much power?
I don't know.
So like, and I just maybe, and like I said, maybe it's just because that's kind of what Wes Anderson's like as a person, and he managed to find himself in those situations.
It wouldn't surprise
at
me.
a young age.
If anyone could
But,
talk a school into saving Latin in real life, probably Wes Anderson.
Yeah. But yeah, I found that kind of quite interesting all the way through.
Well, there was actually like one last prank in inverted commas where he gets Herman to come to I think it's his mum's grave, and he says he'd rigged up a tree to fall on him and kill him, but he can't see the point. And then when at the end, after Max leaves, Herman goes and tests it, and the tree would have killed him.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just like, again, that's just Max going way overboard.
Yeah.
But so it was interesting that going to kind of less substantial cinematic techniques here, I saw that, I found it interesting that the tree fell and then it kind of rolled on into winter as well.
Hmm.
So I know we've spoken a lot about character and a lot about the story, and I think that's what this is. I think that's what this film is about. But when you look at something like Grand Budapest Hotel, it's a lot more about the cinema, and I think that we can't um, we can't just kind of skip over the fact that Wes Anderson has created these little details which I think are not pivotal to the film but still very impressive. So like the idea that obviously the tree falls, and that kind of signifies the end of autumn.
Yeah.
It's like the whole tree just falling over, which is quite funny. But like there's just little things which he's put in there, like the way that Rosemary has like cut up carrots and just lined them up on a plate. Like who eats carrots like that? Like just those little details throughout the film that you go, okay, I quite like this director's not just about story, and he's very good at creating these kind of visual gags and these sort of like visual themes throughout the film and stuff.
He's very much someone with a lot of visual flair.
Yeah, and I think although this film is predominantly propelled by story and character, I think and I guess he acknowledges that in the way that Max puts on these plays with ridiculous visual effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to give a little shout out.
And then I think we kind of talked about a lot of the stuff that happens in winter, with kind of Max starting to reconcile with people. He reconciles with Dirk, he reconciles with Herman. He has that kind of one last shot at Rosemary and it doesn't pay off, and that's I think where he realises he has to properly change. I still don't think he quite gets it, and he's trying to set up Herman with Rosemary. Again with the aquarium, he's still doing the same trick.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that change like that is not just going to be one. It doesn't happen in 2 months.
I think
you know I mean? But
that it shows the growth. Like it shows how he's not just thinking about himself, and that's like the growth in his character. But he is still that kind of he is still that kid who doesn't necessarily understand adult relationships.
Yeah, and I guess and there's a moment where he goes back to Rosemary in her classroom and she starts talking to him about sex. And he obviously starts feeling very uncomfortable because he doesn't know anything about sex. And I think there's like points in the film like that which just kind of go, you have to be an adult and you have to experience these things to be able to know about them. And like, or at least if you want to know about these things on a certain level, it takes physically being or experiencing them to have that understanding. And I think that's kind of that's sort of like peppered throughout the film. And yeah, when you see those two sit next to each other at the play at the end, you kind of go, okay, he still needs to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't all happen in one go, but you see him get there.
Yeah.
Bit by bit.
And then talking about the play at the end, this is even more spectacular than his production of Serpico. Some Vietnam War epic.
It reminded me a bit of Tropic Thunder. It was like Tropic Thunder meets the play at the end of 21 Jump Street. Like they were vibes that I was getting. And, yeah, I mean, very impressive.
Oh, hugely impressive.
Slightly racist. But yeah, I think this. I mean, ultimately, this just sums up the character, like the grandeur of it, how spectacular he wants it to be.
I did love the line to Margaret's parents where he says he couldn't get the play done at Rushmore because a kid had his finger blown off.
Yeah, yeah. I think like again that just sort of reflects like at the time at Rushmore he was kind of waiting. He expected everybody to kind of sacrifice everything for him, including a finger. and then and he's still kind of like there's still that element of him kind of he'll do it anyway.
I almost feel also it's kind of he starts off where Herman early on says, "What's the secret, Max? You seem to have it all figured out." And he says that the secret to kind of being happy in life is finding something you love and doing it for the rest of your life. And for him, it's going to Rushmore.
Yeah.
And here's almost a moment where he's admitting that it's not necessarily going to Rushmore. It's doing things like putting on the plays that is what makes him happy.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's a great point.
It kind of ends with Max and Rosemary dancing and her saying Max pulled it off. He kind of reconciled with everyone and put on the greatest school play of all time.
Yeah, he put on a hit play.
He put on a hit play, and the final shot is everyone dancing. It's so good.
Yeah, I love that it goes into slow-mo, and I just Max's dad on the dance floor. What a sweetheart. Yeah, I feel, and it's nice that it's funny because it's kind of like in a school hall. It's almost like a school dance.
Yeah.
Like it has that sort of feel about it, and it's almost like you've got all these adults dancing in a school hall, which kind of sums up what Max is.
I like that a lot.
He feels like an adult dancing in a school hall.
Yeah, but also
Look at all these analogies.
It almost is set up like that. Almost because as the curtains kind of close on it, it feels almost like that is the stage, and that's you're watching the play.
Yeah. Well, you've had those kind of monthly introductions throughout the film as well.
Yeah, which is very much meant to be like acting the play.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I like that as well. I like that point that it kind of feels like the closing of the play.
And that's the film. And before we kind of get into final thoughts, I think I'll do a little bit of post-production. So this came out to critical acclaim, really mediocre box office performance. It didn't trouble the Oscars at all, but it did win 2 Independent Spirit Awards for Anderson directing and Bill Murray's performance. Murray was also nominated for the Golden Globes. This film really launched Wes Anderson's career, because obviously he'd done Bottle Rocket, but not that much else. And this was launched Schwartzman's career, and he's gone on to do tons of stuff. This was also kind of, I mentioned at the start, a career renaissance for Bill Murray. He's appeared in a ton of sort of independent films since then, having been known for blockbuster comedies like Ghostbusters and Caddyshack. Only recently I saw him in Sofia Coppola's new film, and he's really good in that. And like almost all of Wes Anderson's films, it is in the Criterion Collection. I would love a Criterion copy of this. Only his most recent Isle of Dogs is not in the Criterion Collection, which is a pretty prestigious thing you can say, where you have like 7 out of 8 or 8 out of 9 films in the Criterion Collection.
Yeah.
It's for me, this is kind of one of just a film I adore. Every time I see it, it makes me laugh. As you said, there's just those moments that have more depth to them that just put it over the edge for me. I love Wes Anderson's films, as we've kind of said. There maybe are some issues in them. They're very white male centric, but I think they're all just hilariously funny, and he is wonderfully talented, and this is one of my absolute favourites.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this film a lot. I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know much about it. Turns out I know more about it now than I thought I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't know what to expect, and I came out. I was sitting there acknowledging how much I was enjoying watching it as I watched it, which is always a good sign.
I'm really glad. I think you'll enjoy most of his films. Obviously, the Fantastic Mr. Fox is like the kind of stand-up first time he did animation.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And then there's kind of Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou and the Darjeeling Limited, stuff like that. The kind of the mid-era ones they're good. I don't hold them as highly as I do this or Grand Budapest. but I think
Yeah.
generally he makes great films.
Great.
And it is going to be your pick next week or next time.
It is. So I decided to go with another comedy. At the time of recording, the second Borat film has just come out.
Oh, okay.
So I've decided to go with the first Borat film.
Hold on. Borat.
Yeah,
Make cultural
I need to get the whole
learnings
title
of
up.
America for make benefit glorious nation of Kazakhstan.
Let me have a look. Not Borat, subsequent movie film.
I did
Yeah,
once
I think
nail.
it's something.
I did once nail the title at a pub quiz.
Yeah, okay, so it's Borat, Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation.
Of Kazakhstan.
Is it of Kazakhstan?
I believe it's of Kazakhstan.
Yes, yeah, yes, of Kazakhstan. Yeah.
This will be
Nailed
interesting.
it. So, my pick for next week is Borat, Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan.
I nearly got that. I think I added an
Or
extra
Borat.
making. But I think apart from
Okay,
that, I
yeah.
got it right.
Yeah. Okay, so that's my pick.
Cool.
I love this film. It's not one that I watch very often because I know what happens in it, and it's kind of, I think with humour, a lot of the time, if you learn the joke, you expect it. It doesn't have the same effect. So I try not to watch it too often. But what it does mean is that every time I go back and watch it, I full on belly laugh.
Have you
seen
the sequel?
There are some moments in it. Yes, I have.
Okay. We'll talk about that as well next week, I think.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. But yeah, there are so many. What I love about Borat is we'll talk about it next week, next episode. But yeah, I love that there are completely different moments all the way through, and yeah, I love it personally. So
we've definitely
hopefully
watched this,
you will too.
We've definitely watched this film together. So
yeah, I think we probably have.
I know for a fact we've watched it on my sofa.
Right.
With my
yes.
dad, I want to say, but yeah.
Possibly. Yeah. So that's my pick for next episode.
Awesome. Having just seen the sequel, I am very excited to watch the first one again. I remember
Great.
loving it as a kid, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it.
Right.
Okay.
You can find the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. You can follow the podcast at Nostalgia Bubble on, I believe, Twitter, and at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Hopefully I haven't got those the wrong way around. You can follow me at Shuggie Says on all platforms. That's SHUGGIE Says.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Nyrees, NYEREES, and on Instagram at ReeseNye.
I'll have all those links kind of in the description, and we will see you next time to discuss Borat.
See you soon.